Hello everyone, and welcome to the channel, Solace Stories. The following story is titled, I turned 75 years old, and my son gave me $100,000 for my birthday. The moment I got home and opened the envelope, I tearfully called the police. In a historic neighborhood of tree-lined streets just outside the bustling heart of Chicago, Eleanor was carefully trimming her rose bushes on the front porch. At 75 years old, her hair was as white as snow, but her eyes were still bright and sharp, and her smile was always warm and kind. Her house was modest but impeccably tidy, filled with the faint, pleasant scent of old books and freshly brewed coffee. On the most prominent wall in her living room hung not a family portrait or a painting, but a faded, yellowed plaque for Teacher of the Year. For Eleanor, a retired teacher, life was perfectly serene. In the mornings, she'd join a few old friends for a walk in the park. In the afternoons, she would return home to read and make tea, and in the evenings, she tended to her garden. Everyone in the neighborhood respected her, not just because she had been a beloved teacher, but because she had raised a successful and devoted son, who was the greatest source of pride in her life. Eleanor, tending to your flowers again, I see. Her next-door neighbor, Arthur, called out cheerfully as he walked by with his cane. Looking at these roses of yours, I swear I've never been more envious. The touch you have with plants is more magical than a spring rain. Eleanor looked up, her wrinkled face breaking into a brilliant smile. Oh, Arthur, you're too kind. It's just something to do with my free time. Where are you coming from? Looking so happy. Oh, I was just down at the corner picking up the support check my son sent. It came all the way from Washington, D.C., Arthur said, his voice thick with pride. Young people these days are under so much pressure, all working far from home. But as long as they keep us old folks in their hearts, that's all that matters. Hearing this, the joy in Eleanor's eyes deepened. She nodded in agreement. Yes, you're right. Having devoted children is the greatest blessing of our golden years. My Julian is coming home today, actually. He called last night and said he was flying in from New York to see me. Is that so? Julian's coming back? The last time he visited, he brought you that brand new foot massager. I wonder what surprise he has in store for you this time, Arthur said with admiration. In Eleanor's eyes, Julian was not just her son. He was the most perfect creation of her life. He had been a brilliant and eager student from a young age, and as an adult, he had built a successful business from the ground up in the heart of New York City. Whenever he came to visit, the entire quiet street would buzz with excitement. He always arrived in a luxury car, dressed in expensive suits, and his gifts for his mother were never ordinary. Just around noon, a gleaming black Cadillac Escalade slowly turned onto the quiet street and pulled up in front of Eleanor's house. The door opened, and Julian stepped out. He was about 40 years old, tall and well-built, with a strong jawline. He wore gold-rimmed glasses, and a Swiss watch gleamed on his wrist. He exuded the unmistakable aura of success and confidence typical of a New York City businessman. Following behind him was his wife, Clara. She was elegantly dressed, but her face was etched with a deep weariness. Her eyes were sunken, and she kept her head down, as if trying to hide a long-held anxiety. "Mom, I'm home," Julian's voice boomed, breaking the tranquility of the lane. Eleanor quickly put down her gardening shears and rushed out to greet them, her hands trembling with excitement. "Julian, Clara, you're back. Was the trip tiring? Why didn't you call ahead? I would have cooked a proper meal for you. We ate on the way, Mom. Work has been crazy. I barely managed to squeeze out a single day to come see you," Julian said, giving his mother a quick, almost rushed hug that was still enough to warm her heart. Clara lowered her head slightly and said in a small voice, "Mom, I'm back." "Yes, Clara. Come in inside. Quickly. You look so pale. Work in New York must be terribly difficult," Eleanor said, taking her daughter-in-law's hand and feeling how cold it was and how it trembled slightly in her grasp. Inside, Eleanor hurried to brew a pot of her best Earl Grey tea for her esteemed guests. Julian sat on the sofa, perfectly at ease, like a king returning to his domain. He scanned the room and then said, "Mom, this house is getting too old. Why don't I buy you a high-end condo downtown? It would have an elevator, a housekeeper. You wouldn't have to climb stairs or work so hard anymore." No, don't you go to all that trouble," Eleanor said, waving her hand, her face beaming with contentment. "I'm used to it here. I have people to chat with in the morning and neighbors who check in on me at night. The air is fresh, it's quiet. I couldn't ask for more. As long as you two are running your business well and are happy, then I'm happy." Clara seemed to shrink into a corner, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. She said nothing, only occasionally glancing at her husband before quickly looking down again, her eyes filled with an unspoken, complex emotion. After a few minutes of small talk about health and work, Julian cleared his throat, his expression turning serious and formal. He placed his expensive alligator skin briefcase on the table, unlocked it, and carefully took out a dark red, silk-lined box. "Mom, I didn't bring you cash or a typical gift this time." Eleanor looked at the box curiously. "What are you up to now? Your mother doesn't need anything." Julian smiled mysteriously. He opened the box. Inside, resting on a cushion of golden velvet, was a beautifully carved mahogany picture frame. But inside, the frame wasn't a photograph. It was an exquisitely designed certificate with embossed patterns. A line of gleaming, gold foil letters spelled out the words "Golden Share," and below it was the company name, Future Prosperity Investment Group. Eleanor was stunned. What is this, son?" Julian solemnly lifted the frame and placed it in his mother's hands. He spoke in a booming voice, as if he were addressing a shareholders' meeting. "Mom, this isn't just money. This is your future security. My company just issued a special class of stock reserved for those who have made the greatest contributions. I applied for a share in your name. From this day forward, you are an honorary shareholder of the Future Prosperity Investment Group." "Oh." He paused, allowing his mother to absorb this information, then continued in a proud tone. "What does that mean?" "It means that every year, regardless of how the company performs, you will receive a fixed dividend, far higher than any interest rate from a bank. You'll never have to worry about money again. This is sustainable devotion, the most solid guarantee I can give you." Eleanor was speechless. She tremulously touched the glass of the frame, her old eyes fixed on the shimmering, gold foil words. Honorary shareholder. Dividends. These were terms she had only ever heard on television, distant and momentous. Now, one lay in her hands, like an impossible dream. Tears slowly welled up in her eyes. These were not tears of self-pity, but tears of happiness and pride that had reached their peak. "Son, my good son," she choked out, unable to say more. "You've done so well. Mom is so proud of you." "Mom, don't cry," Julian said, putting an arm around her shoulders to comfort her. "Everything I do is to make sure you can live the most comfortable and prosperous life possible. You've worked hard for me your entire life." In this touching moment, no one noticed Clara. She sat silently, the smile on her lips stiff and forced. Her gaze swept over the golden share certificate, a flicker of fleeting terror in her eyes. The hands in her lap clenched into tight fists, her pale fingers digging deep into her own flesh. A single drop of cold sweat trickled down her spine. She knew, better than anyone, that the so-called Future Prosperity Investment Group was just a magnificent, empty shell, and that the golden share certificate was worth less than the mahogany frame that held it. But she couldn't say anything. She didn't dare. From the moment she had walked through the door, Julian's warning glance had sealed her lips. That afternoon, after Julian and Clara left in a hurry, citing an urgent meeting back in New York, Eleanor did something she had never done before. She took down the beloved landscape painting her late husband had adored, which hung on the main wall of the living room. In its place, she ceremoniously hung the golden share. She immediately called her closest friends. "Is that you, Catherine? I have wonderful news to tell you. My Julian just came to see me and gave me a gift. Oh no, not money. It's a share in his company. A golden share. Can you believe it? I'm a shareholder now. I'll get dividends every year. I can enjoy the rest of my life without a single worry." That evening, Arthur was out for a stroll and saw that all the lights were on at Eleanor's house. He dropped by for a visit, and when he saw the gleaming object on the wall, his jaw dropped. "My heavens, Eleanor, what is that? It's so magnificent." Eleanor, her joy still fresh, pointed to the wall, her voice loud and proud. "Do you see that, Arthur? That is my future treasure. It's a gift of devotion from my Julian. He said this is more precious than gold. Under the warm yellow light of the small house, the golden share certificate emitted a dazzling and enchanting glow. It not only lit up the room but also shone into the innocent and proud heart of a mother, promising a prosperous future. She was completely unaware that this future was built upon a foundation on the verge of collapse. In the days that followed, Eleanor's life felt as if it were illuminated by a new source of light, one that was brilliant and warm. The source was the golden share, hanging ceremoniously on her wall. Every morning after her walk in the park, the first thing she did was not to make tea or read the newspaper, but to take out a soft silk cloth and carefully wipe the invisible layer of dust from the frame's glass. She would gaze at it, smiling to herself, a sweet sense of pride swelling in her heart. Julian's gift had become a symbol, a bold declaration to the world that she was a successful and happy mother. Her joy spread throughout the neighborhood, and passers-by would marvel at the treasure in her home. My Eleanor is so fortunate. Her son is not only successful but so devoted. That's a blessing earned over lifetimes. Isn't it the truth? We're overjoyed if our kids just give us a little spending money for the holidays. Her son has planned out her entire future. That's the caliber of a New York entrepreneur. And, hearing these words, Eleanor's heart blossomed, though she maintained a humble exterior, waving her hand. Oh, everyone is too kind. It's the thought that counts. The size of the gift doesn't matter. But the sparkle in her eyes and the smile she couldn't hide said everything. Amidst this joy, a small cloud lingered in her mind, the image of her daughter-in-law, Clara. She recalled Clara's thin, pale frame and her eyes, which always seemed to hold a hint of worry. With her son's career at its peak, shouldn't his wife be radiant with happiness? Thinking this, she decided to give her a call. "Hello, Clara. It's Mom," Eleanor said, trying to make her voice sound as cheerful as possible. There was a brief silence on the other end. Then Clara's voice came through, tinged with panic. "Oh, Mom, is everything all right?" "Nothing urgent. I'm just calling to see how you are. Have you been eating well lately? You looked so thin. Is work very stressful? You must take care of yourself. You're the wife of a top executive. You need to be healthy and in good spirits to support Julian at all his events," Eleanor said in a rush, her tone full of concern. But all she received in return were a few weak, non-committal responses from Clara. "Yes, okay." She could hear chaotic, noisy sounds in the background, not the quiet hum one would expect from a high-end office. Eleanor continued proudly. "Julian's company must be doing wonderfully. All my friends were so envious when they saw the golden share he gave me. Mom is so proud of you both." The moment she mentioned the golden share, the line went dead silent. Eleanor had to call out several times. "Hello? Clara, are you still there?" Yes, I'm listening." Clara's voice came back, trembling and stuttering. The company is fine. Mom, I have something urgent right now. My boss is calling me. I have to go. I'll call you back later." Before Eleanor could reply, Clara abruptly hung up. Eleanor stood holding the receiver for a moment, puzzled. She didn't suspect her daughter-in-law of anything. She simply thought that perhaps the pressure of big city life was too much. "The poor child," she murmured to herself. "She must be so busy managing the household so her husband can focus on his important work. I should be more understanding." She sighed, pushing aside the fleeting doubt, and her smile returned as she looked up at the golden share on the wall. A few days later, on a beautiful, sunny afternoon, Eleanor was reading on her porch when a familiar voice called out, "Mrs. Eleanor, I've come to see you." Eleanor looked up and was delighted to recognize her favorite former student, Leah. Leah was nearly 30 now, a refined and pleasant-looking young woman with glasses and simple, tasteful clothes. She had been one of the most brilliant students in her English class years ago. After graduating from a top university, she had returned to Chicago and now worked at a major brokerage firm where she was already a respected financial analyst. Despite her busy schedule, she made time to visit her old teacher every month, sometimes with a box of fine tea, other times with a bag of freshly baked pastries. Her affection for Eleanor was sincere and warm, almost like family. "Leah, come in," Eleanor said, getting up happily. "What brings you here today? We had a training session at work this morning, so we got to leave early this afternoon. I was passing through the neighborhood and thought I'd stop by, Leah said with a smile, handing her a still warm bag of coffee cake. From that old bakery on the corner. I know you love their cinnamon swirl. You're always so thoughtful, Eleanor said, her heart warming as she took the bag. Sit down. I'll make you some tea. The teacher and student chatted happily, reminiscing about the old days when Leah was a shy but incredibly talented writer. Eleanor talked about her old friends and her retired life, while Leah spoke of her job analyzing dry data in the volatile world of the stock market. In her excitement, Eleanor suddenly remembered her treasure. She gently patted Leah's hand, her eyes shining. Leah, you've come at the perfect time. I have something to show you that I guarantee will blow you away. You work in finance, so you'll definitely understand its value. End quote. With that, she solemnly led Leah into the living room and pointed to the wall where the golden share was hanging. Look, do you see that? It's a gift your big brother Julian just brought me. He says it's a golden share in his company. I'm an honorary shareholder now. I'll be collecting dividends from now on, without a care in the world. Impressive, isn't it? Eleanor said, her voice filled with pride. Leah looked up, her gaze immediately locking onto the glittering object in the mahogany frame. As someone who dealt with financial instruments, stocks, bonds, and certificates every single day, her professional instincts made her frown. She stepped closer, her eyes narrowing behind her glasses as she examined it carefully. Eleanor was still talking animatedly. My Julian is so capable. He built his business in New York from the ground up, and now he's founded the Future Prosperity Investment Group. Doesn't the name just sound impressive? Leah didn't answer right away. She was busy analyzing what was in front of her, a growing sense of unease creeping into her heart. First, the company name, Future Prosperity Investment Group, was too flamboyant, too generic. Scam companies often chose grand-sounding names like that to appeal to people's greed and ignorance. Second, the design of the certificate was too flashy, too bright. Financial documents with high legal value were typically designed to be simple and formal, with a focus on anti-counterfeiting details rather than external appearance. This golden share looked more like a promotional item than a certificate of ownership. Third, and most damningly, she saw the fine print showing the business registration number. As a financial analyst, she was familiar with the structure of an employer identification number. The number on this certificate had the wrong number of digits. A standard EIN in the United States must have 9. Furthermore, the red seal stamped in the bottom right corner looked crude. The ink was slightly blurred, the characters weren't sharp, and it lacked the intricate security features of a legitimate corporate seal. It looked like it had been made hastily with a cheap rubber stamp. Leah's heart sank, and a chill ran down her spine. All the signs pointed to a terrifying conclusion, one she didn't dare to contemplate. She turned to look at her former teacher, a woman she respected like a mother, her face radiant with happiness and trust. She couldn't bring herself to voice the cruel question forming in her mind. Leah forced herself to remain calm and managed a natural smile. Wow, that's truly a meaningful gift. Big brother Julian is so good to you. She had to find out the truth without alarming Eleanor. She pointed at the certificate, feigning professional curiosity. Wow, this is an internal stock issuance, right? This golden share format is quite unusual. You don't see it on the public market. As someone in the industry, I'm very curious about Future Prosperity Investment Group's business model. She paused, then said in the most sincere tone she could muster, Mrs. Eleanor, would you mind if I took a picture of this certificate? Eleanor was surprised. A picture? What for, dear? Leah had already prepared the perfect excuse. Well, so I can look it up for you in our company's internal system. We have access to a national corporate database. I can check on how Big Brother Julian's company is doing, see if their financial statements look good, and report back to you with any good news. At this, Eleanor was thrilled. Oh, that would be wonderful. Just wonderful. You are such a good student. Quick, take a picture. You're the expert. You can tell me just how magnificent your brother's company is. But you have to tell me as soon as you find out. Of course. I'll look into it carefully, Leah said. She took out her phone and carefully photographed the entire golden share, making sure to zoom in on the registration number and the seal. With every click of the shutter, her heart grew heavier. She was capturing evidence of a scam that would likely shatter the heart of the woman she so deeply admired. After leaving Eleanor's house, Leah didn't go straight home. She found a quiet coffee shop, sat down, and opened the photos on her phone. The gilded words, "future prosperity," shimmered, but to her, they now seemed sharp and mocking. She knew she was facing a cruel reality, and the weight on her shoulders suddenly felt immense. How could she tell her teacher that the greatest source of pride in her life, the future treasure she trusted in, was very likely just an elaborate fraud? The first crack had appeared, and she knew it was only a matter of time before the earthquake hit. For the next few days, Leah didn't call back. Eleanor was on pins and needles, pacing back and forth in her house, her eyes constantly darting to the old landline phone on the table, willing it to ring. She had imagined 100 different scenarios. Perhaps Leah would call and say, "Mrs. Eleanor, your son's company is incredibly strong, profits are soaring, and your share is about to triple in value." Thinking this, she couldn't help but smile, her heart filled with pride. She had absolute faith in her son, in that hopeful name, future prosperity. But Leah's silence was like a dark cloud slowly gathering overhead. A vague sense of unease, which she had tried to brush away, began to creep back into her heart. On a Friday afternoon, as Eleanor was watering her roses, the phone finally rang. She quickly wiped her hands on her apron, her heart skipping a beat, and rushed to answer it. "Hello? Mrs. Eleanor? It's Leah." Hearing her student's voice, Eleanor let out a sigh of relief and asked eagerly, "Leah, you finally called. What's the news, dear? Is it good news? Tell me. I've been waiting for days." However, her excitement was met with a heavy silence on the other end of the line. The silence was so profound she could almost hear Leah's faint sigh. When her voice finally came, it had lost its usual cheerfulness and was low, filled with a grave difficulty. "Mrs. Eleanor, I have something to tell you. It's quite important. Are you sitting down right now?" Leah's question was like a bucket of cold water poured over her heart. The smile on her face froze. She slowly sat down on the small stool beside her, her hand gripping the receiver tightly. "I'm sitting. Tell me, what's wrong?" Leah took a deep breath. "Mrs. Eleanor, over the past few days, I've used every resource I have. I've searched every corporate database and even asked friends who work in finance in New York. The results are not good." "Not good? What does that mean?" Eleanor asked, her voice already beginning to tremble. "You have to listen to me calmly," Leah said, her tone full of caution. "That company, Future Prosperity Investment Group, it's a shell corporation." "A shell corporation?" Eleanor repeated like a robot. The term was foreign to her. "What does that mean?" "It means it's a company that only exists on paper. It has no actual business operations, no office, and no employees. The business registration number on the certificate is fake, and the seal is fake. In the government system, no such group exists." Every word from Leah was like a sledgehammer blow to Eleanor's chest. Her ears were ringing. She shook her head desperately, her voice changing with panic as she practically shouted into the phone. "That's impossible. Leah, you must have made a mistake. How could this be? My son, my Julian, he would never lie to his mother. Maybe the company was just founded and hasn't been updated in the system yet, or maybe it's registered under a different name." She clung to the faintest possibilities like a drowning person clutching a piece of straw. But Leah's firm, pained voice extinguished all her hopes. "No, Mrs. Eleanor, I was very thorough. And what's worse is," Leah hesitated, as if she couldn't bear to speak the most brutal truth, "this company isn't just a shell corporation. It's currently under investigation by the authorities for being a suspected Ponzi scheme." "A Ponzi scheme?" "It's a scheme that uses money from new investors to pay interest to earlier investors, creating the illusion of a profitable enterprise. Once they can no longer raise new funds, the entire system collapses and all the investors lose everything." Leah's voice grew quieter, becoming a pained whisper. "Mrs. Eleanor, that golden share, it's a worthless piece of paper. It's a tool for your son Julian to deceive other investors. He's using your reputation, the reputation of a respected, award-winning teacher, to build trust. He can tell people, See? Even my mother, a brilliant educator, has invested in my company. That paper is his bait, and you are the collateral he's using to guarantee his credibility. Clatter. The receiver slipped from Eleanor's hand and shattered on the tile floor. But she heard nothing. In that moment, her world had completely collapsed. She sat frozen on the stool, the house eerily quiet except for the ticking of the wall clock, each tick like a knife slicing through her heart. She didn't cry. It was as if the tears had dried up before they could even form. The pain was too immense, too profound, far beyond what tears could express. This wasn't the pain of financial loss. She had lived a simple life and never craved wealth. The promised dividends wouldn't have changed her life one way or the other. This was the pain of deception, the pain of betrayal, coming from the person she loved most, trusted most, and was most proud of in this world. Her son, Julian, her life's perfect creation. The successful, devoted entrepreneur in her eyes and the eyes of the entire neighborhood was nothing but a fraud. Eleanor lifted her head, her empty gaze fixed on the opposite wall. The golden share still hung there, glittering with a false light in the afternoon Sunday. But now, in her eyes, it was no longer a symbol of pride but a monument to shame. Its golden glow was no longer warm but cold and vicious, like the eye of a demon mocking her foolishness. Fragments of memory peeled away and reassembled themselves from a new, raw, and brutal perspective. Her son's rushed hug when he arrived, that wasn't because he was busy, it was guilt. The expensive suits, the Swiss watch, the gleaming Cadillac, all bought with stolen money, with the tears of other victims. All that grand talk of future security and honorary shares, all of it was just carefully polished lies. And then she remembered Clara. The thin, pale face, the fearful, evasive eyes, the cold hand and the slight tremble. Now she understood. She understood everything. Clara's anxiety wasn't from the pressures of high society life. She was afraid. She was living in the terror of an accomplice, knowing the truth but not daring to speak, trapped in the fraud directed by her husband. The abrupt phone call when she mentioned the golden share, it wasn't because she was busy, it was because she couldn't continue the lie. The poor child, she was a victim too. A wave of nausea rose in her throat. She had bragged about this lie. She had taken pride in her son's crime. She had gleefully aided and abetted him, turning her lifelong reputation as an educator into a tool for a scam. She felt filthy, defiled. Eleanor slowly stood up. Every joint ached as if it were broken. She felt as though she had aged a decade in just a few minutes. She dragged her heavy feet toward the wall, like a condemned prisoner walking to the gallows. She stood there, facing the golden share, facing her own ruin. With a trembling hand, she reached up and took down the mahogany frame. It felt incredibly heavy in her hands, as heavy as her son's sins. She didn't smash it. The anger had passed, leaving only a hollow, searing pain. Smashing it wouldn't change the facts. Clutching the frame, she walked into the back room, a storage space filled with clutter, dust, and the scent of mildew. She opened an old wooden chest filled with her old textbooks and her late husband's belongings. She placed the golden share at the very bottom, beneath all her innocent and proud memories. Then she took several stacks of old newspapers and covered it, as if she were burying a body, burying the last shred of a mother's pride. She closed the lid, the dry sound echoing in the silence. Returning to the living room, she collapsed into an armchair, curling into a ball. The room seemed emptier now, colder. On the wall where the golden share had hung, only a lighter-colored rectangular mark remained, like a scar that would never heal. It was the scar of trust betrayed, of family love defiled. Outside, the Chicago dusk was quietly falling, beautiful and melancholy. But in Eleanor's heart, the sun had already set, leaving only a thick, impenetrable, and endless darkness. Her beloved son was no longer a successful entrepreneur. He was a con man. And she, the con man's mother, would have to live with that cold truth for the rest of her life. In the aftermath of the storm, a chilling silence descended. Eleanor's world had shattered, but she refused to let herself crumble with it. She was a teacher. Her entire life had been spent teaching others to be strong and to face reality. She would not allow herself to fall apart. The searing pain transformed into a strange kind of calm, the stillness of a lake after a violent storm, serene on the surface, but bottomless and dark beneath. She didn't weep or rage. She simply put the gilded lie away. In the following days, she continued to wake up early for her morning walks, continued to water her flowers, and continued to read her books. But the neighbors all noticed the change in her. Her kind smile no longer reached her eyes, and the proud sparkle was gone. She spoke less, and when someone innocently asked about her son's great company, she would just give a vague reply, "Oh, I've put it away for safekeeping," and then change the subject. The rectangular void on her living room wall became a tangible silence, a secret only she knew. After several sleepless nights, Eleanor made a decision. She picked up the phone and dialed her daughter-in-law's number. Her voice was no longer filled with the earlier warmth or concern, but was calm, tinged with exhaustion, yet firm. "Hello? Is this Clara?" On the other end, Clara answered with a jolt. "Yes, Mom. Is something wrong?" Her voice was still laced with fear, as if she were constantly bracing for bad news. "Are you free this weekend?" Eleanor asked in a steady tone. "Come back to Chicago and stay with me for a day. I'm not feeling well. I'd like you to be here with me." This wasn't a lie. She was sick. Her heart was sick, an illness of disappointment and pain. Clara was alarmed. "Mom, you're not well? What's wrong? Should you go to the hospital? I'll tell Julian." "There's no need for that, dear," Eleanor interrupted her. "I'm just a little tired. I just want you to come. Don't tell Julian. I don't want him to worry and get distracted from his work." Her words were like an order that could not be refused. Perhaps out of a sliver of guilt, a genuine flicker of concern, or simply the fear of refusal, Clara immediately agreed. Yes, of course, Mom. I'll be there Saturday morning." That Saturday, Clara returned to Chicago alone. She looked even more haggard than before. The dark circles under her eyes were deeper, her skin was ashen, and she seemed like a violin string stretched to its breaking point. As she walked into the house, her frantic eyes darted around, immediately noticing the empty space on the wall. Her heart skipped a beat. She knew. Something had happened, but Eleanor didn't mention it. She treated her just as she always had. She took her hand, led her inside, and poured her a warm cup of chamomile tea. "You must be exhausted from the trip. Drink some tea to warm up, dear." "Thank you, Mom," Clara whispered, her hands trembling as she took the cup. The two of them sat facing each other at the small wooden table. The air in the room was heavy, suffocating. Both were silent. Clara didn't dare look up, staring intently at the ripples in her teacup. Eleanor didn't speak either, just quietly observed her daughter-in-law. She saw all the fear, the guilt, and the bone-deep weariness in the young woman. She was suffering. Finally, Eleanor leaned forward, breaking the suffocating silence. She didn't ask a single question. She didn't bring up the golden share or the future prosperity group. She simply placed her own old, wrinkled hand over Clara's cold, trembling one. Then she spoke, her voice devoid of any blame, filled only with an endless sorrow and a deep well of empathy. "Clara, whatever is troubling you, you can tell Mom." That simple sentence, that gentle touch, was the last straw. It completely destroyed the defensive wall Clara had so painstakingly built. The young woman's head snapped up, her eyes wide with disbelief at what she had just heard. There was no scolding, no condemnation. And then, she broke. It wasn't a sob, it was a choked, silent scream that had been buried deep in her heart. Clara collapsed onto the table, her shoulders shaking violently. She wept hysterically, crying for all the days and nights spent living in lies, fear, loneliness, and humiliation. Her tears flooded out like a broken dam, soaking the tabletop. "Mom, Mom," she gasped between sobs. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. I failed you." Eleanor said nothing. She just sat there, one hand still holding her daughter-in-law's, the other gently patting her trembling back. Her own tears fell silently. She cried for her misguided son, and she cried for this unfortunate young woman. When Clara's wails subsided into ragged sobs, she began to confess. The words poured out of her in a chaotic, jumbled torrent. "There is no group, Mom. It's all fake. Julian's company went bankrupt 3 years ago. He lost everything on a bad investment. To keep up appearances, to save face, he started borrowing money, first from friends and family, then from the banks, and finally, from loan sharks. Eleanor felt as if she'd been struck by lightning. Loan sharks. Those three terrifying words. Clara continued, her voice filled with terror at the memory. They came to our door to collect, Mom. They threw red paint on the door of our apartment in New York. They called and threatened us in the middle of the night. They even sent pictures of me grocery shopping, picking up our son from preschool. They said if we didn't pay, they'd never leave us alone. Her whole body trembled. I was so scared, Mom. I was living in hell. Every day I woke up terrified. Julian just got deeper and deeper into it. He wasn't himself anymore. He became cruel, volatile. He blamed me, blamed everyone else. And then he came up with this idea. He said your reputation was the last asset he had. He said he would use it to set up a company, to raise funds from other unsuspecting elderly people, to use their money to pay off his debts. That golden share, he had it printed at a copy shop. I tried to stop him, she cried out in desperation. I told him it was a crime, that it was financial suicide. But he wouldn't listen. He threatened to divorce me if I didn't cooperate, to leave me to face the debt collectors alone. I had no choice. I'm so sorry, Mom. I'm so sorry. End of 4. The confession ended in a choke of sobs. The room fell silent, filled only with the heavy breathing of two women. The truth was out, raw and more painful than Eleanor could have ever imagined. Eleanor slowly took out a handkerchief and gently wiped her daughter-in-law's tears. In that moment, she no longer saw an accomplice. She saw a pitiful woman, an emotionally abused wife, a mother trying desperately to protect her family. She was also a victim, the first and most tormented victim of Julian's fraud. After a long time, when Clara had finally calmed down, Eleanor spoke. Her voice was no longer soft, but had become exceptionally firm. It was the firmness of a teacher, the firmness of a mother who had decided to clean up the mess her son had made. All right, stop crying, she said, each word deliberate. Crying won't solve anything, and we can't run from this, now. She looked directly into her daughter-in-law's eyes, her gaze both stern and forgiving. We have to face this together. Tell me everything, every single debt, every creditor's name, every threat, Eleanor said in a steady voice. I need to know it all. We have to find a way to fix this. Clara looked up, her face still streaked with tears, but for the first time in years, a flicker of hope appeared in her terrified eyes. She was no longer alone. After Clara's confession, a heavy silence settled over the small house. But it was not the silence of despair. It was the silence of resolve. Eleanor transformed from a grieving victim into an unwilling commander, forced to confront the storm her own son had unleashed. She knew that running was no longer an option. It was time to face the consequences. With Clara's help, who, though trembling, found strength in her mother-in-law's presence, Eleanor was able to see the full extent of Julian's web of lies. She sat in silence for an entire night, the wrinkles on her forehead etched deeper than ever. She wasn't thinking about the lost money or her tarnished reputation. She was thinking about two words: doing right. She had spent her life teaching students how to be decent human beings, yet she had failed to teach that lesson to her own son. Now she would have to administer this final, painful lesson herself. The next morning, she picked up the phone. Her hand was steady, her voice was cold and hard, stripped of all emotion. Julian, be here tomorrow afternoon, immediately. On the other end, Julian reflexively tried to feign busyness. Mom, what's so urgent? I'm in the middle of an important meeting with a partner. I don't need to know. Eleanor cut him off, her voice sharp as a razor. I said, tomorrow afternoon, you will be in Chicago. If you don't come back, I will go to New York to find you. She paused for a second, then delivered the final blow. Clara is with me now. That last sentence was a thunderbolt. Julian fell silent. He knew the charade was over. After a long pause, he whispered, Okay, I'll be there tomorrow. For the next 24 hours, the house was filled with a suffocating tension. Clara paced anxiously, biting her nails until they bled. She feared the confrontation, feared her husband's explosive anger. But Eleanor was the opposite. She was terrifyingly calm. She went out to the market and bought the ingredients for Julian's favorite childhood meal: a fine cut of pork belly for a pot roast with potatoes, a bunch of fresh green beans, and some baby back ribs for a soup. Clara watched her, astonished. "Mom, how can you be in the mood to cook?" Eleanor looked at her daughter-in-law, her expression sad and distant. "I'm not cooking for a con man. I'm cooking for the son who was once my pride. I want to see if he still remembers what an honest meal tastes like." Her movements as she cooked were like a ritual. Every chop of the knife, every sprinkle of seasoning was a look back into the past, a preparation for the final judgment. The next afternoon, Julian returned. He didn't drive the gleaming Cadillac. He took a cab to the end of the street and walked the rest of the way. He looked haggard and defeated. The designer suit was still on his body, but it was wrinkled and askew, no longer able to hide his inner turmoil. The confident aura of a successful entrepreneur was gone, replaced by the demeanor of a sinner awaiting punishment. He walked into the house and saw his mother and wife sitting in the living room. The air was frozen. He forced a smile that looked more painful than a grimace. "Mom, I'm home." Eleanor didn't answer. She just tilted her head toward the dining table. "Wash your hands. Time to eat." The meal proceeded in an almost complete silence. The three of them sat around the old wooden table that had witnessed countless warm family moments. Now it felt like a courtroom. Julian picked up a piece of pot roast, trying to act casual. "Haven't had this in a long time. Tastes just like it used to." No one responded. Clara kept her head down, not daring to touch her food. Eleanor ate a few bites of rice, slowly and patiently. When her bowl was half empty, she put down her fork. The movement was so sharp it made Julian flinch. She silently stood up and walked over to the old wooden chest where she had buried the evidence of his deceit. She opened it and, from under a stack of old newspapers, retrieved the golden share. Then, she returned to the table. Thud. She placed the mahogany frame on the table. The sound wasn't loud, but in the absolute silence of the room, it sounded like a gunshot. Julian shuddered violently, his face instantly draining of all color. He stared at the gilded object, once the tool of his lies, now his harshest accuser. Eleanor didn't scream, didn't reprimand. She just looked directly into her son's eyes. Her eyes, once filled with love and pride, now held only a deep and vast disappointment. She spoke, each word clear and resolute, just as she had when she stood at the front of a classroom. "Julian, look at me." Julian tremblingly raised his head, not daring to meet his mother's gaze. "What was the first lesson I ever taught you?" she asked, her voice steady but as heavy as an anvil. "Before you even knew how to write, what were the first 2 words I guided your hand to form? Weren't they 'be honest'?" The words, "be honest," were like a knife straight to Julian's heart. This wasn't a legal accusation. It was a moral indictment, an indictment against the very foundation of character his mother had given him. His last line of defense crumbled. All the false pride, all the borrowed confidence, evaporated. He suddenly slid from his chair, his knees giving way, and fell onto the cold tile floor. "Mom, Mom." He crawled to his mother's feet, clutching her legs like a child, and began to sob uncontrollably. "I was wrong. I know I was wrong. I'm so sorry, Mom." End 1. Tears of remorse streamed down the 40-year-old man's face. In his desperation, he unleashed a torrent of excuses and deflections. "Mom, I didn't want to do this. Business is so hard. My investors cheated me out of everything. Bad friends led me down this path. I just wanted to make you proud, to give Clara a good life. The pressure was too much. I had no choice." He lifted his tear-stained face, pleading wretchedly. "Mom, please forgive me this one time. I'm begging you, don't call the police. If you do, my life is over. I'll go to jail. I'll lose everything. Mom, I swear I'll find another way to fix this. I'll work construction. I'll do anything to pay back the debt. Please, I'm begging you, don't destroy me." He wept, banging his head on the floor, the sound of his forehead hitting the tiles dull and painful. Clara, sitting nearby, began to sob as well, Torn between anger, pity, and contempt for her husband, Eleanor sat motionless, looking down at the son kneeling at her feet. The mother's heart inside her felt as if it were being squeezed in a vice. Her maternal instinct screamed at her to protect him, to cover up his crime. But the reason of a teacher, the integrity of an honest person, told her that enabling evil was the greater sin. To protect him now was not to save him, but to push him deeper into a mire of lies. She made her choice, the most difficult, most painful choice of her 75 years. She slowly pried her son's hands from her leg. She stood up straight, her frail body seeming, in that moment, unusually tall and solemn. "Julian, get up." Her voice was devoid of emotion, but full of authority. When a man does something wrong, he must have the courage to stand up and take responsibility. Running away is not the answer. She looked straight at him, her gaze unwavering. "You say that calling the police will destroy you, but I'm telling you, your lies have already destroyed you. They've destroyed your character. They've destroyed everyone's trust in you, and they've destroyed this family." She pointed a finger at her own chest. "Money can be earned again. A failed business can be restarted. But a lost character, a tarnished conscience, if you don't face it bravely and wash it clean, you will carry that stain for the rest of your life. You will never be able to hold your head high as a man." With that, she turned to Clara, who was looking at her with a mixture of terror and admiration. She took her daughter-in-law's hand, a gesture of reassurance, a promise of protection. Finally, she looked back at Julian and delivered her final verdict. A verdict born of true maternal love. A verdict that held the only hope for her son's rebirth. "Tomorrow morning," she said, her voice allowing no argument, "Clara and I will go with you to the police department. You will confess everything yourself. You will name everyone involved and every victim you deceived. You must accept legal responsibility for what you have done." She paused, taking a deep breath. "That is the only way you can truly start over. This is not a punishment. It is a chance for you to find yourself again. And," her voice trembled slightly with emotion, "it is the last lesson your mother can ever teach you." Silence fell upon the room. Julian was stunned, no longer crying or pleading. He looked at his mother, this old and resolute woman, and perhaps for the first time in years, he truly understood the difference between right and wrong. His mother's choice was not abandonment, but redemption. A painful redemption, but the only path toward the light. The air in the small house was frozen, heavy with the weight of the mother's final verdict. Julian lay collapsed on the floor, limp, as if all strength and life had been drained from him. He no longer begged, no longer wept. His mother's words were both a sentence and a lifeline, slamming shut every escape route in his mind. Clara rushed to her husband's side, helping him sit up. She looked at Eleanor, her expression a complex mix of admiration and a vague fear for the future. Eleanor looked at the two of them, huddled together on the floor, a miserable, pitiable sight. Her heart ached as if pierced by 1,000 needles. Every breath was difficult. She knew her decision would send her only son to prison, that it would put a full stop to the life she had once dreamed for him. But she also knew that if she did not, countless other families would be dragged into tragedy. Countless other elderly people would lose their meager retirement savings. She stepped forward, her voice hoarse with emotion but still unshakably firm. "Julian, I know you hate me. You probably think I'm cruel, that I don't love you. But do you have any idea?" She paused, the tears finally breaking free and streaming down her deep wrinkles. "That every dollar you stole was someone else's hard-earned money? It might have been an old woman's life savings for her medical bills. It could have been a young couple's down payment for their first home. Have you ever thought about them?" She pointed toward the door, toward the quiet neighborhood outside. "Look around. These neighbors, they were like me. They trusted you. They were proud of you. If I stay silent, if I cover for you, one day you'll cheat them too. You'll turn this entire neighborhood into a place of lies and resentment. I cannot let that happen." She bent down, looking directly into her son's vacant eyes. "I can lose a son, but I cannot let you continue to hurt other people, to let other families be broken because of you. I cannot live with that kind of guilt. And I don't want you to live your whole life like a fugitive, hiding in the shadows." She stood up straight, like a judge delivering a final ruling. She gave him a mother's last ultimatum, one filled with pain but also with the only possible glimmer of mercy. I'm giving you 24 hours. Between now and tomorrow afternoon, you will think about this, and you will go to the police and turn yourself in. That is the only way to prove you have a shred of courage and remorse left in your heart. If you don't go, she said, her voice breaking, then I will. With that, she turned, walked into her bedroom, and shut the door with a definitive click. She didn't want her son to see her break down. The moment the door closed, she slid to the floor, buried her face in her hands, and wept silently. It was the soundless cry of a mother cutting a piece of her own heart away. That night was the longest of their lives. In the bedroom, Eleanor sat motionless in the dark, staring at the cold, silver moonlight outside her window. Sleep was impossible. Memories of Julian flooded her mind, as clear as if they were yesterday. The babbling toddler, the brilliant student who always got straight A's, the ambitious young man who left for New York full of dreams, the devoted son who always brought his mother gifts. All these images intertwined with the image of the con man kneeling at her feet that afternoon, tearing her heart to pieces. Had she done the right thing? Justice versus family, which weighed more? In the end, all she knew was that true love was not indulgence, but redemption, no matter how high the cost. In the living room, Julian sat catatonically on the floor. Clara sat beside him, silently holding his hand. She didn't try to persuade or blame him. She was just there, a quiet shadow sharing his torment. Julian felt trapped in a nightmare. His mother's words echoed in his ears. Be honest. Other families will be broken. The last lesson. He looked around the familiar room. Every object was tinged with memory. The wall where he had once taped his elementary school honor roll certificates, the dining table where his mother taught him to hold chopsticks, the faint scent of sandalwood his mother always burned. This was his home, the place that had taught him his first lessons in goodness. Where had he gone so wrong? He thought back to the difficult early years of his business. He too had once been passionate and honest. But a series of failures, the pressure to succeed, the lure of a luxurious lifestyle, and the fear of admitting defeat had pushed him step by step into the abyss. He had fooled himself, telling himself he did it all for his family, for his mother. But deep down, he knew he had done it all for himself, for his selfish, cowardly ego. He thought about running. He and Clara could flee to a strange city, change their names, start over. But then the image of his mother appeared in his mind, a 75-year-old woman, frail but resolute, preparing to go to the police to report her own son. What kind of shame and pain would she endure for the rest of her life? He could escape the law, but how could he escape his mother's judgment, escape the verdict of his own conscience? No, he couldn't be a coward anymore. His mother had given him a choice, a final path to becoming a man in the truest sense. He had to take it. As dawn approached, Julian slowly got to his feet. He looked at Clara and said in a hoarse voice, I've decided. Clara looked at him, tears welling in her eyes. She nodded. I'll wait for you. The next morning, when Eleanor opened her bedroom door, she saw her son and daughter-in-law waiting in the living room. Julian had changed into clean, simple clothes. His face was still pale, but his eyes were no longer frantic. They held a kind of calm acceptance. He walked over to his mother and slowly knelt down again. But this time, it was not to beg, but to sincerely repent. He touched his forehead to the tile floor 3 times, heavily. Mom, your son has been unfilial. I have disappointed you. I'm going now. Eleanor looked at her son, her heart twisting. She reached out with a trembling hand and helped him up. Let's go. Clara and I will walk with you. The morning was quiet in the old neighborhood. The family of 3 walked in silence. Eleanor was in the middle, with Clara and Julian on either side. Not a single word was spoken. The rising sun cast 3 long shadows on the pavement, a picture of a family reunion in the most ironic of circumstances. The police department was at the end of the street, its imposing blue doors like a line between 2 worlds. Julian stopped at the entrance, turning to look at his mother and wife one last time. Mom, Clara, take care of yourselves. Eleanor nodded, fighting back tears. Once you're inside, Be honest. Cooperate fully. Mom, Mom will wait for you. Julian stared at his mother for a long time, as if trying to engrave her image into his soul. Then he took a deep breath, turned, and walked through the blue doors. The doors closed slowly behind him, putting an end to a chapter full of mistakes. The case of the Future Prosperity Investment Group was quickly uncovered, and its scale was far larger than Clara had known. Dozens of people had been victimized, with the total amount involved reaching several $1,000,000. The case shocked the entire city of Chicago. Newspapers and television stations covered it extensively. Julian's photograph was everywhere, his identity no longer that of a successful entrepreneur, but of a swindler. In Eleanor's old neighborhood, gossip was rampant. There was sympathy, there was condemnation, and there was schadenfreude. But Eleanor and Clara faced it all with a quiet stoicism. They offered no explanations, no defenses. They just lived their lives, silently bearing the consequences. Because of his confession and cooperation, Julian received a somewhat lighter sentence, but due to the enormous sum he had defrauded, he still faced many years in prison. On the day of his sentencing, Eleanor and Clara were in the courtroom. Seeing her son in the defendant's box, dressed in a prison uniform, Eleanor didn't cry. She only felt a boundless sorrow and a faint glimmer of hope. This path, though painful, was the only one that could allow her son to atone for his sins and find himself again. After the trial, Eleanor made her next difficult decision. She sold the apartment Julian had bought in New York with the stolen money. Then came an even harder choice, selling her ancestral home in the quiet Chicago neighborhood. It wasn't just a property, it was a lifetime of memories. It was where her husband had taken his last breath, where Julian had let out his first cry, where she had spent her youth and her old age. Every brick, every flower pot, every step was soaked in memory. On the day she moved out, she stood on the porch for a long time, stroking her rose bushes one last time. She didn't cry, but a sad smile touched her lips. She knew that to wash away her son's stain, to find peace in her own heart, she had to let go of these things she held most dear. The money from the sale of the properties, combined with her entire life's savings, was gathered together. Eleanor and her daughter-in-law Clara then began a journey even more difficult than facing the law, a journey of atonement. Following the list of victims provided by the police, they found every single address. Some meetings were filled with tears and fury. They went to the home of an elderly couple who had invested their entire retirement fund into the Future Prosperity Investment Group. The old man threw a stack of papers at them, shouting, "Get out, you scammers! Give me back my money! My wife has been sick and bedridden with grief over this." Eleanor offered no defense. She simply bowed, a deep, long bow. Clara fell to her knees, tears streaming down her face. "Sir, we are so sorry. It was my husband's fault, and it is our fault. This money can't make up for your loss, but please, please accept it. Use it to help your wife with her medical bills. We are truly, truly so sorry." They placed a thick envelope of cash on the table and left silently, the sounds of curses and heartbroken sobs following them out the door. Other meetings were different. People looked at them with contempt, but when they saw this old woman and this young woman sincerely trying to take responsibility for a man in prison, their anger began to soften. This journey lasted for months. With every apology offered, with every payment made, the weight on their hearts lightened just a little. They didn't ask for forgiveness. They only sought to do what was right, to quiet the condemnation of their own consciences. After doing all they could, Eleanor and Clara had nothing left. They left their old neighborhood and rented a small, 300-square-foot apartment in a working-class community. The apartment had one bedroom and a living room that doubled as a kitchen, and the furniture was old and sparse. But to them, it felt clean and warm. To make a living, they used the last of their money to open a small eatery on the ground floor. It had no fancy name, just a hand-painted wooden sign, "Mrs. Eleanor's Breakfast Nook." They sold simple, homemade breakfast items: oatmeal, bacon and egg sandwiches, and coffee. The new life was incredibly hard. The two women had to wake up at 4 o'clock in the morning. Clara, who had once known only designer brands and fancy parties, was now a natural in the kitchen. Her hands, once meticulously cared for, were now calloused from kneading dough and washing dishes, but her face no longer held the anxiety and fear of before. Honest labor had given her a different kind of beauty, one of resilience and acceptance. She didn't talk much, but a smile began to reappear on her lips, a genuine smile, no longer forced. Eleanor, though nearly 80, was still sharp and spry. She served the food, handled the money, and chatted with the customers. The regulars from the working-class community grew to love her. They knew her story, but they looked at her with neither pity nor scorn. They called her Mrs. Eleanor, respecting her integrity and her strength. The little breakfast nook became a warm and welcoming place. People came not just for the food, but for a kind smile and a sincere greeting. In a small corner of the diner, there was a little angel named Leo. He was Julian and Clara's son, now 5 years old. After the scandal broke, Clara had brought the child back from his grandparents' house to live with them. The boy was the two women's greatest joy and motivation. Leo was a well-behaved child. He would often play quietly with his toys in the corner, never disturbing his grandmother or mother at work. His clear eyes and innocent smile were like sunshine, chasing away all their fatigue and sorrow. Occasionally, on their days off, they would visit the prison. Julian, in his prison uniform, was thinner and tanner. His hair was cut short, stripped of its former swagger, but his eyes had become clear. There was no more deceit, only remorse and acceptance. Speaking through the visitation glass, he would look at his mother and wife and say sincerely, "Mom, Clara, you've worked so hard. It's my fault. I failed you." Eleanor would just shake her head. "You just focus on your rehabilitation. Your wife and I are doing fine out here. Don't you worry." Clara would hold up a picture of Leo for him to see. "Look, our son is getting so tall and strong. He's such a good boy. We're all waiting for you." And Julian would look at the photo of his son, and tears would fall. He knew that the sacrifices of his mother and wife and the existence of his son were the reasons he had to live well and become a new man. One autumn afternoon, golden sunlight, thick as honey, streamed into the small apartment. The breakfast nook was closed, and after a long day's work, 3 generations of the family were sitting together. Leo was at the age where he was learning to write. Eleanor took out a small chalkboard and a piece of white chalk. The scene was painfully familiar. More than 30 years ago, she had held another little boy's hand, teaching him to write his first letters. She sat next to her grandson, pulling the small boy into her embrace. "Leo, today Grandma is going to teach you the 2 most important words." She held her grandson's small hand and carefully wrote 2 words on the board. Leo asked in his sweet, childish voice, "Grandma, what words are those?" Eleanor smiled, a smile of true peace and contentment. "These are the words, 'Be honest, my dear.'" "Be honest? That's hard to say, Grandma," the little boy said, wrinkling his nose. "It is hard," she said gently, "but it's a lesson that takes a lifetime to learn, child. We'll go slow. Grandma will teach you." She took his hand again, patiently tracing each stroke on the chalkboard. The white chalk dust danced in the air, glittering in the afternoon sunday. Clara stood nearby, watching them silently, her eyes moist. She knew that the lesson her husband had forgotten was now being replanted, firmly and resiliently, in the next generation. Eleanor looked at the 2 white words on the blackboard. She thought of the fake golden share certificate. Its golden gleam had been dazzling, but it was hollow and toxic. The white of this chalk, though plain and simple, held a pure and eternal truth. She had lost a house. She had lost her life savings. She had lost the false pride of having a successful son. But she had found something 1,000,000 times more precious: peace of mind. She had taught her son a final lesson in responsibility, and now she was teaching her grandson his first lesson in character. The warm sunlight enveloped the grandmother and her grandson. Outside, life was still difficult, and the future still held many challenges. But inside this small room, a true tranquility had descended. It was the calm after the storm, a calm built on genuine love and the courage to face the truth. And that was the most sustainable prosperity of all. Thank you for watching. I hope today's story has touched you. For those who haven't subscribed yet, don't forget to click the subscribe button so we can accompany you every day. Let's grow together. We'll see you in the next one.